critical look now at what to expect from Trudeau's visit to India. Vivek Dehejia follows politics and economics in both countries. He's an associate professor of economics and philosophy at Carleton University. He's also a resident senior fellow at the IDFC Institute, a think tank in Mumbai. First, what should we expect from this trip?
Well, Alison, like most such trips, I think you'll see your fair share of business roundtables, of deals being struck, of photo ops in front of the Golden Temple and the Taj Mahal, and lots of hugs and photos, and perhaps a few deals inked on the side. But no major trade deal, I think, is the real headline here.
So you say, what concrete, what does Canada really want to walk away? What does the Prime Minister want to walk away with here?
Well, this is really like Hamlet, but with the prince absent, because the real takeaway would have been the trade agreement that's been in the works since 2010, since the Harper government started these negotiations. It's been hanging fire. It's gone through multiple rounds, and that would have been the logical thing to sort of launch here, but it's not going to happen.
And what does India want?
India, I think, a couple of things. One is India is now a more assertive power on the world stage. They want to be recognized as a major player, sit at the high table. And so meetings with the US or Russia, and Canada and European leaders are certainly part of what Mr. Modi wants to project as a kind of putative major new world leader.
We heard Modi and Trudeau both speak at Davos about international trade and globalization and the importance of that. But on Modi's part, it appears to be a bit of a contradiction in terms of tariffs that he has raised and some of the more practical things he has done. Explain that contradiction to me.
Sure. I mean, I would say, to be fair, that there are, I think, on both sides some contradictions. On Mr. Modi's side, absolutely. I mean, I've written about this, that after sort of preaching the gospel of globalization in Davos, he came back home, had a budget which hiked tariffs in a bunch of areas like cell phones and TVs and so on, ostensibly to support local manufacturers as part of his Make in India plan, I think really as kind of a quick revenue grab through tariffs. So that is dissonant for sure. I think his broad principled commitment to globalization, is honest and valid, but the budget, I think, did not, project that as much. And as for Mr. Trudeau, I think there the dissonance is more between his support, for globalization kind of notionally, but the fact that he has this so-called progressive and comprehensive trade policy agenda, which attempts to yoke all kinds of things, women's issues, First Nations issues, environmental issues, onto trade, which really complicates the whole trade negotiation process when you bring in a whole bunch of other non-trade issues into it, in my view.
You've expressed some skepticism overall about Canada's approach and this free trade agreement with India.
Indeed, I have. Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, Alison, I'm kind of an old-fashioned trade economist by training, and for me, trade deals are supposed to be about trade, first and foremost. But the truth is that trade deals, laterally, not just Canada's, have become about everything but trade, whether it's intellectual property or it's labor rights, environmental rights. So it's become just a grab bag of different things you yoke to trade. And so the trade agenda itself, to my mind, is being really watered down and really kind of whittled down and become less important. And again, on issues that concern Mr. Trudeau, the progressive agenda that he's set out, I think India, although it's got problems, is a thriving democracy with constitutional protections for women, minorities, the environment. So I don't think that India in particular, Mr. Modi especially, feels that he needs to be lectured to by Mr. Trudeau or anyone else about these issues. So particularly when you think about women's rights, that has been certainly an issue in the news as far as India is concerned. Sure. And it's an important issue, gender equality, obviously, for Canada's Prime Minister. Absolutely. So how do you approach those issues when they're a priority for your government, as is trade? So how should Trudeau approach that then? Well, I think, again, in my view, a little old-fashioned, quiet diplomacy. Speak behind closed doors. Say, look, we're concerned about this. What are you doing? And I think behind closed doors, Mr. Modi or whoever will say, look, quite frankly, we have some issues. This is what we're working on. But I think doing it publicly in a way that can only be called grandstanding, frankly, and yoking it to trade, to me, is going to be totally counterproductive. India will get its back up. China already has. Vietnam has. Countries have their own path towards the social issues that concern us and that concern the world at large, and let Indians figure this out for themselves. And again, India is a democracy with a robust, sophisticated constitution. That system isn't perfect, but it does work.
You've also suggested that part of this trip could be overshadowed by concerns about Sikh nationalists in Khalistan. Why and how, I guess?
Well, I do think so, and I have said that a couple of times. Well, one is just the reality that there are elements of support for Khalistan, for Sikh nationalism or Khalistani separatism among Sikhs in Canada. That's not a secret. We had the Air India bombing, the worst terrorist attack we've had in our history in Canada. And again, I want to use my words carefully, I think it's fair to say that a number of Sikh politicians in Canada have been, shall we say, fellow travelers with Khalistani sympathizers, and I mean of all parties.
In what way, fellow travelers?
Well, they have been reluctant to forthrightly condemn, in black and white and no uncertain terms, the perpetrators of the Air India bombing. The NDP leader, for example, when pressed, did not actually even name the main mastermind of the Air India bombing. That's one example. So I think there's, and I think it's again an open secret in the larger community that, perhaps some of these politicians, again, I'm not, singling anyone out, maybe speak in two voices. They sort of one thing to the folks in Punjabi, at the town hall meetings, and something different publicly. And I think that this is certainly the sense in India, that there has been a sort of a soft peddling of the issue. India is a country that's been riven by all kinds of separatist movements, not just Punjab. I think that they would be happy to see Canada take a very forthright, no-nonsense position that we do not support separatism in Khalistan, or anywhere, and we're opposed to extremism and terrorism.
Every foreign leader takes these trips, obviously, with an international agenda, but a domestic agenda here. So what do you think how do you think this plays for Prime Minister Trudeau's political agenda?
I think very well, because again, there's a large diaspora. There are about 500,000 Sikhs in Canada. Many of them vote Liberal, and they're mostly in Toronto and Vancouver, and so they can, they are important, and they can be swing voters in key ridings. So to be quite honest, I think this trip is really for them. It's for the folks back home, more than, given that there's going to be no trade deal. It's going to be mostly photo ops and fluff at the other end, and a nice warm message for the folks back home, if I don't want to sound too cynical, but that's my view of it, Alison.
Thank you very much for your insight on this.
Thank you, my pleasure.